Joining us now from Washington is Janatan Sayeh. He's a research analyst focused on Iran at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. So I have to say that we are seeing a noticeable shift in Iran's missile patterns. We're seeing fewer launches here in Israel overall. There have been overall larger coordinated salvos, but certainly much less ballistic missile attacks than we saw yesterday and the day prior. What does that tell us about Iran's remaining capabilities at this point?
Well, it tells us that the military campaign, of course, was able to weaken the regime's ability. But as to what that means, comes down to us, of course, not simply targeting the silos or the manufacturing facilities, but also taking out the launchers and taking out the command structures that leads a lot of this. Given how sensitive it is, given that it's an intelligence operation when it comes to targeted assassinations, we're not hearing much about it. But this is a great indicator that it tells us that the Islamic Republic, or specifically the IRGC's leadership, is not capable of really coordinating effectively. I think that's critical. But quickly, if we contrast this to the 12-day war, if you remember, of course, on the first night of the war, Iran launched hundreds. But towards the end, the numbers had decreased, whereas the accuracy had increased towards the end of the 12-day war. This is not the case at all anymore, which tells us that this operation has been much more successful than the 12-day war. That said, it is probably because of the damages they sustained during the June conflict, but nonetheless, it tells us that they don't have the same capacity anymore. And also, if you look at the nature of the targeting, they're just launching missiles at any country, really, that they can reach, again, suggesting that it's shifting more into rogue elements and there's not a unified command behind some of this military strategy in the Islamic Republic.
Right. Now, Janatan, there's another question that I want to ask you, and that is about the recent warning that we saw from the IRGC Quds Force, basically warning the United States that they could see attacks on their home. What type of capabilities does the IRGC have outside of Iran?
They unfortunately have an extensive network abroad. So you pointed out the IRGC Quds Force. The Quds Force itself has a few branches. Of course, one of the, they're divided up, one dedicated solely to Turkey, one dedicated solely to Iraq, one dedicated to the Levant, one for the greater, of course, former Soviet Union, and then one dedicated to the Americas. And that has been getting more and more investment in the last few years. And if you look at what they've been trying to do with the assassination of the president, tells us that they've been shifting a lot of resources towards that. And a lot of it is done actually through Canada, that eventually they hope to get it to the United States. We do know that it goes beyond just Iranian operatives carrying out. If you remember how they attacked Salman Rushdie, for example, in the United States, the person was not Iranian, even though he was indoctrinated with Islamic Republic's ideology. That's one angle. The other one is just simple criminal networks. They're not ideologically aligned necessarily, but they're just gangs. This is something they do in Europe a lot too. We do know they're in touch with the Hells Angels in Canada, similar with the United States as well. So the threat is certainly real. But then again, the FBI has done a really excellent job in countering a lot of it. I know there was a shooting recently in the United States that might have ties to the Islamic Republic. That would, unfortunately further indicate that yes, the regime does have a reach. But that said, their primary target is always civilian or civilian infrastructure. And that's what's so really dangerous about their ideologies, that it's just about causing harm. If you look at how they indiscriminately bomb Israel, UAE, right, or Qatar or Saudi, or their terror attacks in the United States, it's strictly to terrorize people. It's never about military targets, because they know they cannot reach them.
All right, Janatan, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us with that breakdown.